would like to rewatch today's presentation, they will be uploaded to our Carroll-Lee and Whiteside extension YouTube page. And those will be uploaded, closed captioned, and available for future review. So thank you for joining us this morning on the first installment of the Growing Horticulture in Northwest Illinois webinar series. And we're up to about 150 people who are registered. So I'm going to turn my video on for just a moment so you guys can all see who is presenting. I'm Bruce Black. I'm the horticulture educator for Carroll-Lee and Whiteside County. And I'm happy to spend the next hour with you today, as well as the following 6 Wednesdays with you, presenting this series. And so I'm going to turn my video back off just so that we keep the bandwidth available for the webinar so it goes smoothly and we don't hear any audio distortions at that time. So today's presentation is, I've short named it, Don't Kill Your Tomatoes. And this is one of the popular questions that we always get asked during the growing season is what's happening with our tomatoes. And so tomatoes are the #1 grown backyard crop for a lot of home gardeners. And tomatoes are really easy to grow until something goes wrong. And so this is a presentation that was put together by a coworker of mine, Dr. Elizabeth Wally, who's down in the St. Louis metro area. And so I'm happy to share it with you today. So getting those red juicy tomatoes can sometimes be a challenge. Usually during the growing season, from the moment you put the plant in the ground to all the way up until it is harvested, something could go wrong. And so these are just a couple of examples of some things that you might have seen common in your backyard garden, a local community garden, or a school garden. And so this picture right here, this is an example of sun scald. The top right picture right here, this one is an example of bacterial spot. And then down here at the bottom, we've got a tomato hornworm damage on our tomatoes.
Okay.
And so we'll, oops. Sorry, new for using the annotate feature on Zoom, so I apologize for that. All right, so insects and disease can happen anytime from the moment you plant it to the last time you pick the tomato. So even when you start off with a transplant that you've purchased from a local garden center or big box store, or ones that you've grown yourself, there can be some kind of problem that happens. This picture on the right, this is one of the things that we in Illinois have been seeing a lot more of, and that is stink bug damage happening on the tomato. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go forward.
Wonderful.
So in addition to a number of potential problems that are physiological in nature, there are a few more that we can have. So we can have sun scald, blossom end rot, cat facing, and zippering.
There were 2 in the shed. He just didn't know what. Right.
And these are going to be physiological in nature, so they're not caused by an insect or a disease. So starting off with sun scald, this one is usually caused by a lack of leaf cover. And what this one essentially is a sunburn that we would get from not having enough sunscreen on. Tomatoes can get that as well. What we'll see is the fruit will start to develop yellowish or white patches on the side that is exposed to the sun. And so usually this will happen on the tomato side that's facing south or west as they get the most exposure. Then after the yellow white patches, they start turning yellowy and drying out. And then a secondary infection can happen where they get introduced to mold and you might start seeing mold patches growing on there. Fruit that is protected by shade or leaf cover will be unaffected. Oops. To control for this, there are some tomato varieties that are resistant, that have more leaf cover with them throughout the season. And we can use some fungicides or insecticides to prevent the leaf loss due to insects and diseases. But there's no fungicide or insecticide that will work for the sun scalding effect. Another thing that we can do is we can plant or cover our plants with row covers. And so using some shade cloth to drape over our tomatoes will help limit the amount of sunlight that is getting to our tomatoes. So these are two examples of our sun scalding. And so on the left picture here, you can see the white leathery patches that have developed. You can also see that there are some creases starting to form in this white patch, and that is where it's drying out and will start cracking in there. On this right picture here, this is a mold infection that's taken hold on that sun scald. Our next physiological disorder is blossom end rot. And this one is a very common one, and it's a calcium deficiency. A lot of people will see this and they'll think that their tomatoes actually have a disease, but it's actually a disorder. So calcium is used in the creation of cell walls in plants. And during the water stress periods, there's not enough calcium to be uptaken to get to that growing point. And so the cell walls are essentially being built without that calcium to fortify that wall. So I always like to tell people this is kind of like building a wall for your house and not using any mortar, or building a house of cards and a breeze comes through and it falls apart. Blossom end rot can affect fruit at all stages of development. Usually we will see this during periods of water stress or irregular watering. And so what you'll start to see is that the blossom end, which is the side opposite of the stem end, will become water soaked in its appearance. It'll start having a sunken black or leathery lesion, and then will develop a secondary infection oftentimes. Control for this is careful watering practices, providing irrigation when we have those hot periods, during the day and we haven't got any water or rain. You can also mulch to help retain water moisture. And then foliar applications of calcium can be used to supplement the calcium that you might have in the soil. So one of the questions I usually get with blossom end rot is, if I'm seeing this, I don't have enough calcium in my soil, right? And it's actually, you may have enough calcium in your soil, the plant's just not able to take up enough of it to keep up with the demand. And so that's why we can recommend the applications of calcium sprayed directly onto the leaf, because then the calcium will enter through the stomas and go into the leaf tissue that way and be directed to tomato development. So here are a couple of examples of blossom end rot. And so this left example is just a clear example of blossom end rot. So you can see the black sunken lesion here on the blossom end. And the right picture is of blossom end rot that has developed a secondary infection. So a lot of our issues that we have can start with one disease or disorder, and then opportunistic infections can also happen. So with the black and sunken lesion, this is going to become really thin tissue, easily punctured, and when those bacterial cells enter, it's going to be a wet environment that's going to allow that bacteria or fungus to grow. Our third...
I'm sorry, Bruce, we have a couple questions about blossom end rot. Do you want to take those now, or do you want to wait?
Let's take questions at the end.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure that I get through everything.
Okay.
Thanks, Janice. All right, our third disorder is going to be cat facing. And this is a deformity that's caused by something internal or external that occurs during the formation of flowers. And this results in this deformity of the cell tissue. Oftentimes we see this when we get a late spring frost or really cold weather during the blossom time. And what happens is that cold weather will distort and kill the cells that will normally develop into the fruit. And so one of the common cultivars that this happens to is brandywine. And it's simply with the flowering time of brandywine that we get more of those cold weather occurrences during blossom. Zippering, for this one, if you look at the top picture here, you can see it looks like somebody has created a zipper on, or a seam on the tomato. And so these are thin scars that occur, that extend either partially or fully. They'll start at the stem end and can go all the way to the blossom end. Sometimes we'll see open holes, like on the bottom two red tomatoes or the bottom green picture, in addition to the zipper scar. Usually what happens is the anther that is attached to the newly forming fruit causes the zipper scar. And so we usually only see this on select varieties. So if this is something that would be unsightly for you to see on your tomatoes, I know for me, for my personal use, this isn't an issue. I simply just cut that part off of the tomato and use it. But I know that we have folks who sell for farmers markets, and with having blemishes on the tomatoes, they don't sell as well. But this tomato is simply safe to eat. You would just cut off that part. You may also see some cracking of the tomato, and that is due to that rapid development of the fruit with the fluctuating water. This is one of the questions that I've got over the last few years as the temperatures have kind of fluctuated. And so this is failure to set fruit. So high daytime temperatures and night temperatures reduce flower production. So night temperatures that are above 70 degrees can reduce flower production and pollination. Plants sometimes will drop flowers if it gets too cold at night. So if it gets under 55 degrees, the flowers will fall off. And this is just a natural defense mechanism for the tomato to not be spending energy when it's too cold out. The most favorable night range for tomato set fruit is between 58 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Now for the daytime temperatures, when they get above 90 degrees, coupled with low humidity or drought conditions, this will lead to poor pollination and cause the flowers to drop off the plants as well. Another thing that's not on the slide is that when it gets too hot out, when it gets about 98 degrees or above, tomato pollen will actually become inviable. So it won't, even if the pollen is transferred to the flower, it will not produce a tomato because that pollen has become inactive. So for failure to set fruit, we'll see some stunting or some excessive growth that will cause the plants to remain vegetative. Continuous light can also inhibit fruit set. So this is a common issue for greenhouse growers if there's not a nighttime where they cut off the light outside or in the greenhouse, then it will cause the pollen and the plants to not set fruit. So there are an overwhelming number of diseases that can occur on tomatoes, and there are some that can occur more commonly than others. Now, this is about the time in a presentation where folks are saying, do I really want to grow tomatoes if they're going to be this much of an issue? And that's not the purpose of the presentation. I don't want to dissuade you from growing tomatoes, but it's simply to give you the facts and issues. So the first disease that we're going to talk about is bacterial spot. And this is a common one. We'll see the dark brown water-soaked spots on the leaves that later become blackish. On the tomatoes, the spots kind of look like moles that we have on our skin. They'll be black, raised specks, and they'll have a scab-like appearance to them. To control for these, we want to do crop rotations and carefully transplant selection of your transplants is going to be beneficial. Copper sprays can help provide some control for bacterial spot, but good sanitation practices is really going to help during the growing season. So good weed control to help prevent disease buildup is going to be key. Bacterial speck is another disease that we've got, and the symptoms may appear on any part of the plant. So the leaves that are infected, you'll see a small dark brown irregular patch of dead tissue that will be surrounded by a yellow halo. So in that top left picture there, you can see good examples of bacterial speck. The severity of the disease is increased by wetness of the disease. Since it is a bacterial issue, increased wetness from sprinkler irrigation, rain, or heavy morning dews can cause those bacterial cells to transfer a lot easier. To control for this, we want to minimize the wetting of the leaves. Either use drip irrigation, or if you're going to water with a watering can or a hose, using one of the wand attachments and watering right at the root zone. Again, for this, copper sprays provide an effective control as well if the infestation is too heavy. Buckeye rot. So this one, plant nerd moment here. This is one of those diseases that I actually think is really cool. It kind of reminds me of a polished rock or a geode, where you'll see the grayish green to brown water-soaked spot. And this is where tomatoes have touched the soil. So if you eliminate your tomatoes touching the soil, you will not have an issue with this. So if you stake or trellis your tomatoes, or if you're growing indeterminate tomatoes where they continue to grow about a foot a week during the growing season, having some kind of pulley trellis can help as well. So the reason I like this is the pattern of alternating light and dark concentric rings, which resemble the markings on a buckeye. The smooth skin, it'll initially remain firm. Later, as the blight continues, it becomes rough and results in a watery rot. Buckeye rot is spread by surface water and splattering of the rains. And so we see this a lot in compacted soils. So one way to help control for this is to mulch your tomatoes. Plastic mulches prevent the fruit from coming in contact with the soil. You can also stake your tomatoes and control so that they aren't touching the ground. Tomatoes in raised beds often have well-drained soil, so this isn't an issue because we don't have a lot of surface water. Avoid frequent irrigations that keep the ground too moist. And since this is a fungus, you can use protectant fungicides to control for this. Anthracnose is one of the diseases that I know everybody has seen on tomatoes. It primarily affects ripe fruits, and these lesions first appear as sunken circular spots that will deepen and have a darker color in the middle. The reason why I know people have seen this is because if you look at that top picture, it often reminds me of a dartboard, so that bullseye appearance. with those concentric rings that affect the enlarging lesion. Water splashed on the fruit during rain or irrigation will carry those fungal spores from fruit to fruit or plant to plant. So good sanitation, when you see this, removing any diseased fruits off the ground is going to help as well. Crop rotations and fungicide sprays will help control for anthracnose, as well as good sanitation practices. Early blight. This disorder is more commonly known as a foliar or stem disorder. The fruit damage caused by an early blight will have the appearance of a sunken, leathery, dark lesion near the stem. And so if you look at the picture here on the screen, you'll notice the leaf infection. We first see this on older leaves as these brown dead areas with the yellowing tissue surrounding it. Early season damp, rainy weather helps to encourage the infection, and they are more noticeable when the temperatures are increasing mid-season. So if anybody remembers last year, we had more early blight because the weather conditions matched what I just described. Again, water from the morning dew or overhead irrigation can contribute to this disease spread. Crop rotations and fungicide sprays are also going to help with this. If you have problems with early blight or any of these diseases during the growing season, you can contact me at the extension office and I can help you get the right fungicide or herbicide that you need. Herbicide would be for weeds. Fungicide would be for the diseases. Septoria leaf spot is our next one. And for these, we're going to see circular water-soaked lesions that occur on the older leaves. Eventually, they will turn to brown and gray centers, and then those leaves will die. If the infection is severe enough, the entire leaf will die off. The fungus can overwinter on debris from previous crops or weeds, so it's good to start every year with a clean planting area in your garden. That's going to be important. The disease can be controlled with fungicides as well that are labeled for Septoria leaf spot. Fusarium and verticillium wilt. This is one with the easiest way to combat it is with bred-in resistance. So a lot of the cultivars now, when you look at the plant label, if you see an F or a V on the plant tag, it will, that F or the V, or both F and V, will tell you that the cultivar is resistant to verticillium and fusarium wilt. Most of our heirloom cultivars are going to be susceptible. Grafting to resistant rootstocks is an option. So if there is a heirloom variety that you grew up with as a kid that you just love the taste of, grafting that onto a resistant rootstock is an option very similar to what we do with fruit trees. So there are resistant rootstocks that we use to protect for diseases, as well as dwarfing for fruit trees. It's the very same principle. You can also get grafted tomatoes at your local garden centers or big box stores as well. And the really cool thing about a grafted tomato is that it's available, it has more built-in resistance. There are rootstocks that are also available to tomato mosaic virus, corky root, bacterial wilt, and nematodes. These resistances are for some diseases that can really affect a whole tomato crop. And another great thing for a grafted tomato is you get increased vigor. So usually when we graft a rootstock and a scion portion, which is the top portion, we get an increased vigor. So there's more growth for the tomato and they produce faster. So like tomato diseases, there are also potential insect pests. So I have a number of them on the screen, but we're going to talk about a few of them rather than go through the whole list. There are entire books written on tomato diseases and tomato insect pests and how to control for them. So we're really hitting the more common ones that we're seeing today. Starting off with tomato hornworms and tobacco hornworms. So I know sometimes we use those interchangeably. We call them mostly just hornworms, but there is a distinction between tobacco and tomato hornworms. The tobacco hornworm is going to be an example of the top left one, and this one has 7 diagonal lines on its body, where a tomato hornworm is going to have more of a V-shaped pattern, and there are going to be 8 of them down its back. So the bottom left picture is going to be an example of the tomato hornworm. Now, tomato hornworms can be a big pest. They can defoliate an entire tomato plant overnight. And some of you may be asking what those white packs are on the back of the tomato hornworm in both pictures, and those are actually eggs from an beneficial insect. It's a parasitic wasp, and if any of you have ever seen the movie Alien, it's the very same concept. So the wasp will inject the tomato hornworm with eggs. The eggs will develop. As they develop, they keep the hornworm alive and they feed on the hornworm. And then when they get ready to hatch, they will produce these egg sacs and they will hatch out and fly away. So very, very cool. The wasps are very tiny and they don't affect humans. And for both, insects are parasitized by a number of insects. Like I mentioned, the common one is going to be a wasp. And the white parts that were on there are going to be the cocoons for the wasp as they get ready to hatch. And then they kill the hornworm and emerge to seek out new hornworms to parasitize. So if you see tomato hornworms, it's good to pick them off. If they don't have the white cell pack or the white cocoons on them, pick them off. If they do have the white cocoons on their back, just leave them there. At that point, they're not eating the tomato plant, but they are being used to produce more of those beneficial insects. And those beneficial insects, then when they hatch, they will go after any more tomato hornworms that you might not have seen in your garden. You can also, if you have a really bad year with tomato hornworms, you can use Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT, which is effective to kill off the caterpillars. It affects how they digest the leaf portion, and it kills off their guts on the inside. Using BT, you want to be careful of any other caterpillars that are in the area as well, because if they eat the tomato with the BT on it, they will also ingest that BT. So I did see a question here, and I do want to go back because they do blend in, and it's easy to show with the pictures here. They're going to be walking along the stems, and the easiest way to identify the tomato hornworm is it will have the yellowish distinction as well as the V-shaped pattern. Even on the tobacco hornworm, you can see the white striping. And so scouting for these is going to be really your best practice. Going out there, looking at your tomatoes. Ideally, you would be out there looking at your tomatoes every day, but I know practically during the growing season, it might be every day or two, or every 2 days, or every 3 days. If you start noticing any of your tomato plants that look like the one in the bottom right, that is going to be a really big indicator that you have a hornworm present. One thing that I've noticed from growing tomatoes myself is usually these kind of, if you don't have a lot of foliage out there, these really stick out. All right, our next insect is going to be mites. And so for mites, they can either be green or red, and they're going to be very tiny. For these, you're going to need a hand lens or a magnifying glass to really see these. They're related to spiders, and they do produce webbing. So if we look at the bottom picture right here on the right, we can see a lot of the damage from the spider mite. And what we usually see is on the underside, we'll see that light webbing, leaf distortion, or the speckled discoloration. That is usually how we're going to notice the spider mites. We also might see on our tomatoes the kind of yellow speck patterns of the tomatoes. That's going to be another indication. They're more favorable in dry weather. So when it's dry outside, it's good to be on the lookout for them. We do have some insecticides that if we use, they'll actually increase mite problems, which is 7 or other pyrethroids. And the distinction between the red and the green mites is actually the red mites are going to be the predator mites. So if you use an insecticide, it can be hard on those predatory mites. If you see any of this speckling pattern, or you notice the webbing, the easiest thing to do is take a white sheet of paper, put that underneath the leaf, and shake the leaf. Then use your hand lens to look to see if you have any green mites. If you have green mites, those are going to be the ones that are causing the issues for your tomatoes. The red mites, if you see red mites, those are actually going to be the predator mites that are eating those green mites. Stink bugs, unfortunately, this is the one that we've become all too familiar with not only the native stink bugs, which can be several species. They can be brown, green, black. They can have markings or they cannot. And this also does include the new brown marmorated stink bug, which is the invasive stink bug. Myself, I've noticed at least 20 of them coming out of the house this spring. I've been finding them around. So they'll be shield shaped, about 5/8 of an inch long, about 1/3 of an inch wide. The nymphs or the juvenile stink bugs will resemble the adult stink bug, but they will be smaller and they won't have their wings. So if you look at the middle picture here, this is a nymph stage or a baby juvenile stink bug. Why are they called stink bugs? Because they discharge a foul odor. So this is one that I recommend never squish. With this one, if you find it in your house, just use a pop bottle and put it into the pop bottle. For the adults and the nymphs, what they do is they suck the juice from the plant and the fruit. And so on that bottom right picture here, the yellowish green discoloration is where the stink bugs have been feeding. So you'll see a whitish depression, and if you get that hand lens out, you'll actually be able to see puncture marks, and they will also, if they've been feeding on the plant, you'll start seeing some wilting of the leaves. Cloudy spot, this is the stink bug feeding damage. For the fruits, they're going to be white or yellow flecks with patches of tissue occurring on the patches of tissue just beneath the leaves. To control for stink bugs, they often attack tomatoes that are surrounded by weeds. So good weed control, pulling those weeds out, removing that additional foliage for them. Feeding on young fruit is barely noticeable, but what happens is as that tomato develops, those spots don't change color, and we start seeing more of those blemishes to appear. You can use an recommended insecticidal program to control for stink bugs. Tomato fruitworm. This is also known as the corn earworm or cotton bollworm, and the larvae are variable in color, ranging from pale yellow to red or green or brown, with stripes running lengthwise. So if you look at the top picture here, you can see a green tomato fruitworm that has stripes running from its head to its tail. They prefer feeding on green fruit and usually do not enter a ripe fruit. The damage that you will see is a deep cavity in the stem end of the fruit. During its development, one of the larvae may injure several fruit. And so if you look at the green tomato here, you can see a number of puncture holes caused by the tomato fruitworm. I noticed these a lot last year at one of our children's garden, which was more in a rural environment that had a lot of corn around it. So how to stay out of trouble to keep your tomatoes on the up and up and give them the biggest fighting chance. Avoid planting members of the tomato family in the same location year after year. Tomatoes are in the Solanaceae family with peppers and eggplant and potatoes. And so it's good to give those crops a 3-year rotation at least. So if you plant tomatoes 1 year in the east side of your garden, it's going to be another 2 years before you plant tomatoes in that location again, or peppers, or potatoes or eggplants as well. Start with proper soil fertility levels. So always recommend getting your soil tested yearly. I know that sometimes we let that go for a couple of years. The extension offices do have bags and sampling information to get your soil tested, so you can contact your local extension office. I know all 3 offices in Carroll-Lee and Whiteside County have sample bags and how to take soil samples, where to send those to get tested, and then once you get your results back, we're happy to help you interpret those results. Delay planting until the temperatures stay above 58 degrees, unless you're giving them some kind of protection. So for these, if you are providing some shelter, or you're doing this in a hoop house or a high tunnel, that will give you some protection from those cold temperatures. Plant in raised beds if you have issues with drainage in your yard. Pay close attention to your watering schedule. This will help eliminate several of the physiological diseases, as well as those that are spread by the diseases that are spread by water that we had talked about. And then watering near the base of the plant is best, a best practice to use. Trellising and caging plants will help keep any of the tomatoes off the ground, give them that support so that they don't fall over during the planting season. Applying straw mulch or a plastic mulch can help benefit to retain soil moisture and help those tomatoes from touching the ground. Big thing is scout, scout, scout. So making sure that you are out there looking at your tomatoes at least every couple of days to see what's going on. Avoiding certain insecticides as well to help prevent some of those flare-ups with mites. So in our last few minutes here, we've got some new and invasive pests. One of the invasive pests that I mentioned, the brown marmorated stink bug, this is the one that I've been seeing a lot of lately. And it was introduced, but not intentionally, from Asia in Pennsylvania in the 1998. And they've spread all the way to Illinois. And so They overwinter as adults. They aggregate in large numbers in homes and other shelters. So if you're like me, you've been noticing these guys coming out of the woodwork. And we usually have one generation up here in Northwest Illinois. To identify these guys, they'll have a white stripe on their antennae, and then they will have black and white banding on their abdomens. They'll also have smooth shoulders on the top of their shield shape. And last time I looked, every county in Northwest Illinois has had these reported. So we used to recommend reporting these to Extension or to the invasive pest coordinator, but for Northwest Illinois, we have these reported. If you are joining us from other locations throughout the state, check with your local extension office to see if it has been reported in your area. So this is the damage that the brown marmorated stink bug does, and it damages several crops. And when they bite into the fruit, what they do is release that stink bug toxin into the fruit. And these top pictures are tomatoes and apples. And on an apple, when you open it up, you see that brown oxidized cork appearance. Now, with the brown marmorated stink bug, sometimes you can taste that stink toxin that is put in there. So it does give it a little bit of an off flavor. The other invasive species that I wanted to mention, because this is the newest invasive species that we have, is the spotted wing Drosophila. And why this is such an issue is you can see it here on this raspberry. This raspberry is actual sized, and the spotted wing Drosophila is that big. So it's a very tiny insect, and how it gets its name is on the male, it has 2 black spots on its wings and dark banding on its legs. And so normally the spotted wing Drosophila that we see are going to be the males. The females, however, are the bigger threats. So if you look at the section here, the picture on the right, this is a close-up picture of a female. And notice these, and I'm going to use my annotate feature here. Right here, this is called an ovipositor. And so an ovipositor is where they can stick that into the fruit and lay eggs. And so what makes this one so dangerous, well, not dangerous, but a nuisance, is the 2 rows of serration on this ovipositor. So it essentially becomes like a hacksaw, and they can jam it in there and it'll open up the fruit. Then they're able to lay their eggs, and the eggs will then hatch in the fruit. So the females don't have any spots on their wings. And so you can put out these yellow sticky cards to see if you do have any spotted winged Drosophilas on the traps that are present in your garden. This is one that we're on the lookout for in Illinois, but it's not one that I've had any reports to me for at least my area. And so on the sticky card close-up here, you can see the 2 black spots of the spotted winged Drosophila on there. And so a little bit about the life cycle for it here. It's a very quick-lived insect. Its egg, it'll stay in its egg phase for about 12 to 72 hours. And spotted winged Drosophila produces about 350 plus eggs in its lifetime. They take 5 to 7 days in the larval stage, then they pupate for 4 to 15 days and become adults that live about 30 days. So you can see this is a very quick-lived pest. And so they'll live as their adults for about 3 to 6 weeks and lay over 300 eggs. The reason why it is an issue is because it affects a wide range of crops. So from high risk is a lot of our strawberries, raspberries, cherries, our soft fruited fruits, into our more thicker skinned tomatoes, apples, pears, peaches, and its alternate hosts are on landscape plants, as well as any wild berries that you would have if you live next to a forest or a timber. And I do apologize for anybody who was eating breakfast during the spotted winged Drosophila portion, but I did want to just show at the bottom here, this is a blueberry, and you can see how tiny that egg or that pupa is compared to the blueberry. And when it opens up, you can see that the fruit is quite unpleasing. All right. So I do want to share with you guys my contact information. If you have any questions as you're thinking about this presentation afterwards, for those teachers that need to turn in evaluations, my email address is right there, as well as Janice has been putting that in the chat box. And I do want to let you know that due to the current COVID-19 issues, I'm not actually working in my office. So the number that's on the screen is for my office number. During the next month or so, the best way to reach me is going to be through my email at brucejb@illinois.edu. So with that, I know that we are at time. So I know there were some questions in the chat box. So
yeah, Bruce, this is Janice, and thanks for the reminder to folks that need teacher CEUs. You can scroll back up through the chat box to get that information, or if you need it, feel free to email Bruce or I. But there are quite a few questions, Bruce, so I'll start back from the top, which was, do hornworms eat part of the fruit as well as the leaves? And since they blend in so well, how do you find them?
All right, great question. So actually the hornworms will eat the foliage of the tomato plant. They're really go for those leaves. I haven't, and they will go after the tomatoes as well. If you remember to that first slide I showed you with the pictures of the different damage, one of those green tomatoes did have the hornworm damage on there. And Yeah, so this bottom picture here was of that tomato hornworm eating that green tomato. And then to identify them or to scout for them, the easiest way to do that is to be out there looking at your tomatoes. They do blend in with the tomato vines. So looking for the yellowish patterns, because on a tobacco hornworm, they're going to be white, 7 white diagonal lines. And then for the tomato hornworm, they're going to have a yellowish black V pattern. There'll be about 8 of them on the back. And that's usually the easiest way to notice them. As you can see on one of the pictures here on the bottom, they do protrude out of the stem. So look for those masses hanging off the stems.
The next question, and you answered part of this kind of towards the end, was can you use straw or hay as mulch? And I heard you say straw is great, but what about hay?
So straw is usually recommended. With hay, if you grow it yourself, you would know which stage it was in when it was cut for mulch. With hay, usually it tends to be very seedy. So if you're buying it from someone or have a farmer friend who's doing hay, talk to them to see if it was producing any seeds or anything like that. Straw is usually a lot easier to work with. Later in the season, or if you know a farmer friend who has it, you can also use corn stover mulch as well.
Is it safe to eat fruit with stink bug damage?
So yes, it is safe to eat. The issue that we see is that toxin in there that they produce. It's not toxic to us, but it provides an off flavor. So if anybody has ever smushed a stink bug and got that smell, sometimes people can taste that smell in the tomato that has stink bug damage.
Okay, the next one. Do you delay planting until the daytime temps are above 58 degrees, or I assume what they mean, or the nighttime temps stay above 58?
So you want to delay for the nighttime temperatures to be above 58 degrees. Tomatoes are one of those crops that we say to plant on or after your last frost-free date. And in Northwest Illinois, where we are in Carroll-Lee-Whiteside County, that is going to be about May 15th.
Does Epsom salt protect against blossom end rot if you're putting it in the planting hole?
For that one, I'm going to have to double check with. Epsom salt, I believe, is magnesium as the primary element in there and doesn't have a lot of calcium. But I will double check that one.
Okay. Does blossom end rot occur if the fruit is growing rapidly?
Sorry, Janice, what was that one?
Does the blossom end rot occur if fruit is growing rapidly?
Yes. So if fruit are growing rapidly and the water is either fluctuating or it's a dry period of time, you will notice it a lot more than if the water is constant. Sorry, I had a hiccup there.
That's okay.
So as long as you have that constant water supply during the blossom or the fruiting period, that will help to limit the blossom end rot.
Great. What varieties of tomatoes are resistant to sun scald?
That one I will have to double check off the top of my head. I'm drawing a blank here, but I will take the name down and I will send that one out.
Yep. And we can also do a, just for folks to know, we can do an email blast out to you with answers to some of these questions too.
Perfect.
Would you still be able to eat the green tomatoes even if they have some of these issues that you've talked about?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is if you're seeing any kind of fuzziness or the watery soaked lesions, I would make sure to cut those portions off, as well as anything. So I would cut off more than just those spots. So for the anthracnose, yes, cut that spot off, wash the tomato thoroughly, and then it should be good to eat. I always tell folks, use your best judgment, because these are bacteria or fungal spores, so make sure you're thoroughly washing your produce.
Okay, and that answered a question we also had about whether it's safe to cut the anthracnose out and eat the rest of the tomato. And maybe, Bruce, this might be a question we put back out as, you know, an FAQ, but what varieties are not prone to zippering?
That one I'm gonna look up as well, because I want to make sure I give the right answers.
Okay. How do you get rid of stink bugs?
Move to a state that doesn't have them. So for stink bugs, they are a pain in the butt, sadly. And with there being a number of natural stink bugs that are native to North America, they're not always the easiest to get rid of. There are insecticides that you can put on your plants to help control for stink bugs, but I always tell folks, make sure if you're applying a pesticide to your tomatoes or any of your edible crops, make sure you are reading the label. Those pesticides are going to have REIs, so residual times, that will limit when you can apply a pesticide to your plant. That helps, those REIs help to give you a safe time that pesticide will break down before you eat it.
The next question is about the brown marmorated stink bugs. They get Meg's tomatoes and zucchinis. Can you explain what I'm not going to say this word right, Bruce, pyrethrids are? She has tried soap that is supposed to get rid of them, but it hasn't worked, and I believe has potassium salts of fatty acids in the soap, she says.
Okay, so pyrethroids are a type of insecticide that can be used. The pyrethroids are the ones that people have been careful to spray because of bees, because it can affect bees. So making sure to spray when bees are not active is going to be one of the big things to do with spraying the pyrethroids. And then
So,
looking,
go ahead.
I was just looking to see if there was another part of the question.
Yeah, the other part of the question was they've tried soaps, but they haven't seemed to work.
Okay.
Either.
And I think that one came from Mrs. Penaflor. So I will follow up with her with the recommendations from our PCEP office for stink bugs.
Tiffany has a question that says, so these bugs, are they interchangeable with other fruits and veggies? So the bugs we've talked about today, can they infect other fruits and vegetables?
Yes.
Okay.
So a lot of the insects that we've talked about today will also affect other crops in the garden as well. And you may also notice them on some of your landscape plants. A lot of the insects will have a wider variety of hosts that they will go after.
Andy asks if the presentation will be made available, and I think you sent the slides out by email this morning, right, Bruce?
Yes, so the PDF versions of the presentations were sent either last night or this morning, depending on when you registered, as well as this presentation will be put up onto our YouTube page for further review.
Great. Laura asks, what is the best organic pest control to use?
For that one, it would depend on what crop we're talking about. For tomatoes, I might have to consult with Grant on that one, because Grant does a lot of organic pest control for tomatoes. And I know, Grant, you're on. Do you have a recommendation?
This is for stink bug control. Was that the one that was mentioned?
Laura didn't specifically say.
If it's stink bug, probably neem oil is going to be the best option. That's the one that most folks are using, and they'll probably find some pretty good success with it. It's regularly available, although it does have to be applied directly onto the stink bug. So it cannot just be applied on the plant and expect to control it.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bruce, someone asked, they have a relatively small garden, 12 foot by 12 foot. So how do you recommend rotating crops when your garden is so small?
That's a good question. So the best recommendation I have is keeping good records of what you plant each year and where. If you tune into next week's presentation on community gardens, I actually show some of my drawings of a garden that I helped maintain. And I'm a big fan of drawing your garden out. I cannot draw to save my life, I will tell you that, so it's okay. And just making a sketch of your garden, saying I put tomatoes in the northwest corner this year, and that row or rows of tomatoes went 2 feet. Then you know, going into the next year's, that 2 feet of row, you're going to need to rotate into another crop family. So either cucumbers, pumpkins, herbs, just as a couple of examples. That's the easiest way for rotating. I know that in a smaller space, there is easier transfer for some of those soil-borne diseases, but any rotation you do is going to help.
And on April 22nd, big flavors and small spaces, container fruits. That might be another webinar people could join in and hear about how to do some of that in containers as well.
Yes.
Andy asks, why do tomato leaves curl? Are there some varieties that naturally have curled leaves?
So that's a good question. The biggest reason that I've noticed for a lot of plants in general to curl is it is a physiological response to temperature and heat. If you think of a tomato leaf specifically, that whole area is going to be affected by sunlight throughout the day. So if it's a hot day and it hasn't had a lot of water, it's going to be hit, the full surface is going to be hit by sunlight. A natural response that plants have as a way to cool themselves is to curl their leaves or roll their leaves to limit the amount of surface area. That's the physiological response. There are also a number of other environmental or disease issues or bug issues where the leaves will curl if they've been hit by an insecticide or an herbicide. If they've been fed on by a bug, they might curl as well. But those are the three short answers.
Do you have a favorite tomato variety to grow?
So that's a tough one because I have been growing a lot of tomatoes throughout my life. But I love exploring the amount of tomatoes and the varieties that are out there. And this picture on this last slide was actually a tomato variety that I tried last year. It is the canary yellow tomato. And these were very delicious. They were easy to grow, even when we had those difficult growing patterns last year. This tomato plant did not get bigger than a foot, but as you can see, it was packed with tomatoes. And for our children's gardens, I grow the same crops at all 5 locations, and there was some fluctuation in growth patterns for the year, but that tomato right there, even if it was only 6 inches tall or if it got above a foot, it had that many tomatoes on it. And it's one that can be grown in containers as well.
Great. And I think our last question is, when you do rotate, what is the time limit? And I kind of have 3 years in the back of my mind, that's what you said earlier, to wait to plant in the same spot.
Yes, so usually we do a 3-year rotation. If it is a place that you have had verticillium wilt in the past, we might recommend up to 5 years, but 3 years is usually a good crop rotation for most gardens.
Great. Bruce, I think that's kind of the last question, and I did respond to Bob's question about verifying that you were here. Unless you're a teacher, Bob, and then you have to send me an evaluation form that I posted earlier, but let me know. So do you have any closing comments you'd like to make, Bruce?
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. I look forward to continuing on with everybody next Wednesday with how to plan and manage a community garden. I will tell you that is one of the biggest questions I always get. And I try to give everybody during that presentation kind of the everything you need to think about. And depending on, I was just thinking if Bob is a master gardener or a master naturalist, they can report that in VCMS. And if their county coordinator has any question or wants to verify that you were in attendance, just let me know or let the coordinator know. They can check with me. But that confirmation email I did send you would be verification as well.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your sunny day.
Thanks, everybody.